So today, of the two great tantric colleges, Gyuto and Gyume, here we are gathered at the Gyuto Tantric Monastery in exile. So I'd like to thank the monastery for this invitation to me. So when the Master Tsongkhapa was in Serachuding, teaching the great commentary on Gyasamaja Tantra, at the end, asked who will preserve this teaching through learning and practice. And of course, Tsongkhapa had great disciples like Gyaltsabje and Kedrubje, but none of them gave any response. But Jejun Sherab Singye, from Amiz, who was in the assembly, got up and said, so through the process of study, reflection, and meditation, in other words, through teaching and practice, promised to preserve this teaching. And Tsongkhapa was very delighted and gave the text that he gave teaching on to him. And then later, Gyuchen Kunga Tundrup in the ordinary perception, there was some kind of controversy with him, and then he founded the Gyuto Monastery. And in Humbutse, there was a name Yevshilungpa, a place of 4 yaks or something like that. So in the Tsang, there was the Segyu tradition, a monastery that was founded. And then in the central part of Tibet, the Gyuto and Gyume were founded. So among within the teaching of Tantra, these tantric colleges mainly focused on the Gyasamaja Tantra. And so Master Nagarjuna wrote the Dose, and in order to give write a text on the generation stage practice of Gyasamaja, and then he also wrote these 5 stages, which is on the completion stage of Gyasamaja. And Master Nagarjuna's disciple Aryadeva wrote the Judu, Compendium of Practices. And then Master Chandrakirti wrote that of the bright light lamp. And these are the texts that are preserved through teaching and practice in these tantric colleges. So from amongst the Sarmal, the lineage of Tibetan Buddhist tradition, these monasteries of Gyuto and Gyume are the ones which keep these tantric colleges. So without really understanding the general teaching of the Buddha, and then the different sets of tantras, saying that the tantra is the highest form of teaching of the Buddha is just a word. And then Rinpoche, in this the great treatise on the stages of the path of the Mantrayana, writes that one should gain a firm conviction in the teaching of the Buddha through critical analysis by using our intelligence. So he says, train in this unflawed eye of wisdom through logic. And one should become so firm in one's conviction that nobody can actually lead you astray from the Dharma. And so, in this Nalanda tradition, masters like Nagarjuna and so forth have used logic and reasoning to demonstrate the truth of the teaching of the Buddha. And so, Nalanda tradition emphasizes logic and reason as opposed to mere faith. Of course, in the Pali tradition, they mostly resort to scriptural authority. Whereas the Nalanda masters have demonstrated and established the meaning of the truth of the teaching of the Buddha through the path of reasoning. So by training oneself in the eye and through logic, intelligence, eye of intelligence through logic, one should find a firm conviction in the teaching of the Buddha. So the main teaching of the Buddha that is unique to this tradition is the teaching on dependent arising, dependent origination of things. Master Nagarjuna says, whatever arises through dependence is said to be empty, and that is also said to be designated, and that is the middle way. There is no phenomenon which is not dependent, and therefore there is no phenomenon which is not empty. So whatever things there are, they are dependently arisen. And in the Madhyamaka Karika of Nagarjuna, he says these, and the commentary to this by Buddha Palita, the Buddha Palita commentary says, if things were to have any essential, self-essential existence, then what is need is there for dependence. And so what this shows is that though we cannot find things, the pillars and so forth, when we do critical analysis of their reality, into their reality, nothing can be pinpointed as being this and that, yet things do exist by way of dependence. And so when we say things are empty, it doesn't mean that, that things don't exist at all. But they do exist by way of worldly conventions, as Master Chandrakirti says. Though things cannot be found through the analysis of the sevenfold reasoning, yet they do exist by way of worldly convention. And so, in this way, the teaching of the Buddha is demonstrated through reason and logic. And here, it's not just sophistry that is being used merely for intellectual purpose, but the purpose of these reasoning and using the logic and so forth in order to demonstrate the truth of the teaching is to apply and integrate the teaching within ourselves for our transformation. This is all 7 billion people on this earth. Everyone wants happiness and not suffering. Of course, there are physical and mental pain and pleasure, but the main thing is mental pain and pleasure. And all these misfortunes that we face is because of the self-cherishing attitude. Because of the self-centered attitude, we have fear, anxiety, suspicion, and so forth. And so, to counter this selfish attitude, Master Nagarjuna says that even if there are few sentient beings left, may I work for them, and even if, even after I have attained enlightenment. So in his precious garland, Master Nagarjuna, these practices of altruism are taught, and the main commentary to Master Nagarjuna's teachings on altruism is found in Chandideva's The Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, in which, if you are able to study in conjunction the sixth chapter in conjunction with the 8th chapter, you'll see how the self-cherishing attitude can be suppressed in the beginning, and then will be shaken from its roots so that it cannot reside in our mind. So these destructive emotions are the ones that disturb our peace of mind. And Master Aryadeva in his 400 verses says, just as the bodily faculty permeates all other faculties, sensory faculties, likewise ignorance permeates all other negative, destructive emotions, the mental afflictions. And so this ignorance can be overcome by understanding, through the understanding and insight into dependent origination of things. And so one of the factors which disturb our mind, peace of mind, is also seeing things as they appear, perceiving things as if they exist the way they appear to us. And so because we see things to have some kind of independent, autonomous existence as good or bad, then we have attachment or anger and so forth. And so attractiveness or unattractiveness in things is our projection of mind. So when you see the faults or shortcomings of these negative emotions, and then you will be able to see how to counter them so that they are reduced. Even if you are not a believer in past and future lives or enlightenment and omniscience and so forth, you can still practice this altruism and understand the wisdom of emptiness or dependent origination. I know many scientists taking interest. So those aspirants, the intelligent ones, should train their mind, train in the eye of intelligence through logic, and make themselves unassailable by those of the opponents, and gain firm conviction in the teaching of the Buddha. So Gongdang Rinpoche also has advised us to train in the teaching of the Buddha step by step. And so it's very important to pursue study of the teaching of the Buddha. So after coming into exile, of course, in this monastery, for example, Gyuto and Gyume Monastery, traditionally didn't have the extensive study of philosophy and logic. But after coming into exile, at my instruction and advice, they have actually taken up the study of philosophy and logic, which didn't used to be their traditional a part of their traditional curriculum. So this is an improvement over the traditional curriculum. So if you have to actually explain the profundity and the specialty of Guhyasamaja Tantra, you must be able to understand bodhicitta, this altruistic spirit of enlightenment, and therefore it's important to also study the classic texts like those of Abhisamayalankara and Madhyamaka Avatara and so forth. And so the monks, you should study these texts, classic texts on Buddhist philosophy. So Je Rinpoche, in his the great exposition on the mantra and the path, says, find a firm conviction in the key teachings of the Buddha. And Rinpoche himself, the Tsongkhapa himself, has said in his educational biography, says, in the beginning, I have studied extensively. In the middle, the teachings dawned as advice or spiritual instruction to me. And in the end, I pursued the teaching of the Buddha through meditation. And then in the prayer to Tsongkhapa himself, it also says that he had done extensive study of the teaching of the Buddha and also practiced it in this degenerate age. So having done your studies of the teaching, the purpose of that should be to integrate the teaching within oneself in meditation, and so that you actually are able to combine study and practice. So the Gyuto Tantric College is located in South India. So next month I'll be in Gandhin, which is also in South India, in Mundkot. And then I also have told the Gyuto Tantric College that I'll come to their monastery as well. And so you are the followers of the great master Jetsun Sherab Singye. So you should make yourself, you should understand the entire teaching of the Buddha, which begins with the general teaching, and then on the basis of that, having that foundation, go into the study of Tantra as you have in your curriculum here. And so I would like to thank you for all your efforts. And so there are also people who were monks here before and have disrobed. They have also formed some kind of organization. So though you have not been able to keep your monastic vows, but whatever you have studied and learned in your monastery, you should use them to give introduction to the teaching of the Buddha and show example to others how to be a good person and also an intelligent one at that. So if you can do this, then it will be very good. So that's all I have to say. Thank you. Is there anything else? So through logic and reasoning, train your mind, train yourself in the eye of wisdom or intelligence. So as in the Mulammadhyamaka Karika by Nagarjuna, it says that things are empty yet dependently originated, and dependent origination also is empty by nature or inherent existence. So we actually say, talk about the infallibility of law of causality, cause and effect. So the cause has the potential to give rise to its effect. And for the effect to arise, of course, we need a cause. Just because there is the law of causality, the dependent origination of causality, to try to prove that things have some kind of an independent intrinsic existence is not going to hold true. So the realists of Buddhist philosophical schools say that things do have some kind of objective existence and things. Therefore, the causality can be talked about. So because of something that is given rise to, we talk about a cause which gives rise to that effect. And not only that, the effect is reliant or dependent on its cause, but even the cause is posited in relation to that effect that it gives rise to. And therefore, what this shows is that things have no independent objective existence whatever, but they are relative and mutually dependent. So Tsongkhapa in his three principal aspects says, furthermore, when appearance dispels the extreme of existence and when emptiness dispels the extreme of non-existence, and if you understand how emptiness arises as cause and effect, you'll never be captivated by views grasping at extremes. And so emptiness and appearance of things, you must complement each other. So, of course, emptiness is something that all the Buddhist traditions of Tibet talked about, but most of them usually explain emptiness in terms of how things are without any fabrication. And just with that kind of word, people kind of are satisfied to explain emptiness, whereas Tsongkhapa goes into details about how things are empty, and while being empty, how things still can be posited as having conventional existence. So when I read one of the writings of Kyedub Rinpoche, one of the disciples, chief disciples of Tsongkhapa, The Dose of Emptiness, as it's translated in English, I found him to be sometimes quite boastful of his knowledge, whereas Master Tsongkhapa doesn't do that kind of thing. So Rinpoche, the Tsongkhapa himself, of course, when it comes to very difficult points, he deals with them thoroughly. So it's like some kind of a stone, heavy stone, wrapped in some kind of a wrapper, so there was a person who would actually wrap a stone in his robe, and when a dog, when he went to see a lama, or somebody, the dog would bark at him, and in order for the dog to keep quiet, he would use that stone that is wrapped in his robe and hit it on the dog. So Rinpoche's works are like that. There is some weight and great weight in it, but he doesn't show off his knowledge or be boastful about his knowledge. So there are 5 great texts on Madhyamaka philosophy written by him, the inside sections of Lamrim Chemu and Lamrim, the intermediate stage, and then the commentaries on Madhyamaka Avatara and the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, and then the 5th one is his own independent writing, which is the treatise on explaining the interpretable and definitive teachings of the Buddha, distinguishing these two. And so we are followers of Tsongkhapa. The first Dalai Lama says, although I am not able to repay your kindness, referring to Tsongkhapa and his disciples, but I am still doing my best to serve the Dharma without any bias. So I belong to the lineage of the Dalai Lama. And I usually boast that I usually say that I was born in the area where Tsongkhapa was born. So we were from this almost the same kind of a native place. So one Geshe who was from Amdo region used to say that any Tibetan scholar must necessarily be Amdo. That's too much to say, of course. Of course, we can say that there were, in the past, most of the Tibetan great qualified scholars, Geshes and so forth, were from Amdo and Kham regions of Tibet. So because they came from far away, the homeland were far away, they really focused on their study diligently. Whereas those from the central part of Tibet, because their homes were nearby, maybe they were not able to focus as much as the ones from Kham and Amdo. So Great Master Tsongkhapa was someone who was learned, experienced, yet humble. So just as he says, one should make oneself unassailable by opponents and gain firm conviction in the teaching of the Buddha. So someone who has studied the great treatises written by great Indian masters, like the 17 Nalanda masters, can actually proudly have discussions and dialogues with modern scientists. So why it is so is because we follow not just based on faith, the teaching of the Buddha, but we follow the teaching based on reason and logic. The Buddha himself has said, "O monks and scholars, just as gold is tested by rubbing, cutting and burning, likewise you should examine my teaching, investigate and analyze my teaching, and then follow it, not because you have faith or devotion in me." And so the Buddha tells us to actually investigate and experiment his teaching, and does not say we should follow his teaching based on faith alone. So, as followers of the Nalanda tradition, we must use reason and logic to understand the teaching of the Buddha, and then find the path to liberation, so that we can free ourselves from this bondage. So I have connections with modern scientists, Western scientists, and so forth. So when we explain about Buddhist psychology, logic, and philosophy, these modern scientists, Western scientists, actually grow interest in learning from our tradition. They admire our tradition and learn from this wisdom. whereas other religious traditions would have to be careful with the scientists. So, having learned these treatises written by the Nalanda masters, we are unassailable. We become unassailable by the opponents. So I used to have the wooden ball that are used in the Gyuto and Gyuto Tantric colleges, and today I have got another one. This is called big. So I'd like to thank you for this big ball, wooden ball. So according to your program, I was supposed to speak now, but I already gave my speech in advance. So you have offered me prayer and request for long life. Of course, all Tibetans pray for my long life, and particularly those Tibetans inside Tibet whose faith and also passion towards me is incredible. And around the world also, there are many people who also admire me. I also make my prayer. So just as it is said in the Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, may I be varieties of sustenance for all living beings across the expanse of space. And also, as long as space endures, as long as sentient beings remain, may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the transmigrated beings. So I always think of benefiting others and serving others. I have been able to, of course, I'm able to help beings on this earth. And so Tibetans and many other people in this world do trust me and look to me. So I also dedicate myself to serve sentient beings. I hope to live 110 years or so. So I usually recount the story of Balden Hamo, the protector deity, female protector deity, giving me some kind of a prophecy. So the Tibetan Buddhist tradition and the undaunted courage of the Tibetan people, we in exile represent the Tibetans inside Tibet, and we have done our best so far, and I would like to request you to continue to do so, as I also have done my best so far. The Gyuto Monastery's sponsors have also come here. I would like to thank you all, the benefactors of Gyuto Tantric College. You have found an interest in the teaching of the Buddha, and particularly this monastery, Gyuto Tantric College, which is part of the institutions preserving the teaching of the Buddha. So I would like to thank you, the benefactors of Gyuto Tantric College, for supporting this monastery. So, of course, because of our connection in this life, this kind of connection that we have now, we will maintain this connection between us will remain life after life. This is quite true if you look at history also. And I tell people that when I meet people, Tibetans and others, I say to them that you will be taken care of and guided by Avalokiteshvara, life after life. I'm not just saying it blindly, out of blind faith, but as someone who resorts to reasoning and logic, I can say this. So those who even pray for the guidance and care of Avalokiteshvara, life after life, will surely be fulfill this wish, their wish. I always feel that I am a messenger of Avalokiteshvara. So of course Avalokiteshvara may shower his blessings to us from the heavenly realms, but I am here as his representative or his messenger to carry out Avalokiteshvara's message to our people. So those who have connection with me indirectly have connection with Avalokiteshvara as well. So sometimes I used to tell this story about Vadisangpo Avalokiteshvara statue that is inside His Holiness's palace. It's a very special image. And after it came into exile and was kept with me, I did some divination. And the monastery, Tsongkhapa Monastery, monks were the ones who were taking care of this statue in Tibet. And when they were moving from Dharamsala to South India, I did a divination. And according to the divination, it showed that Bodhisattva wanted to stay with me. Although Tsongkhapa Monastery had been very kind to him, taking care of him. And Tsongkhapa monks told me that you can actually see change in Bodhisattva's face. And so I also have experienced this. So he always looks smiley. So I'm like a caretaker of Bodhisattva. One night I had it in my dream of Bodhisattva, and he was going, and then I wasn't respectful to him, but I asked him whether he actually realized emptiness. And then he said yes, and then I followed up the question with another question: do you realize emptiness directly? And he said yes. So just like a person talking, a person to person. So when you keep faith in me, it's quite definite that you will have the blessings of Avalokiteshvara. 100% sure.